There are moments when the world seems to stop, not because of war or disaster, but because of the quiet loss of someone who made life feel a little lighter. Today, that moment belongs to George Wendt. At 76, the man who played Norm on Cheers is gone. And for millions, it feels like a familiar voice just went silent. He wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a character. He was something far deeper. George was the comfort after a long day, the laughter when life felt too heavy, the one face in a room that always looked like home. He didn't chase the spotlight. He was the spotlight because his presence made people feel seen, understood, and cared for. When Norm walked into that bar, everyone knew his name. And now that George has left this world, we remember why that name mattered so much. This isn't just an obituary. This is a story of a man who helped generations feel less alone. A man whose bar stool was more than a prop. It was a place millions mentally returned to every time they needed a moment of peace. He didn't leave us with grand speeches or dramatic exits. He left us with something better: warmth, wit, and an unforgettable Norm. This is not just the story of George Wendt. This is the tribute he earned. Before the fame, before the applause, before Norm, there was just George, born on October 17, 1948, in Chicago, Illinois. George Wendt grew up far from the glitz of Hollywood. He was the average American kid, quiet, curious, and a bit awkward. Raised in a large Irish Catholic family, he was one of 9 children. Life was noisy, unpredictable, and filled with character, the perfect training ground, though he didn't know it then. Academics weren't his strong suit. He struggled in school and was even expelled from Notre Dame University due to poor grades. But where traditional education closed a door, life opened a new one. He eventually found his way to Rockhurst College in Kansas City, where he earned a degree in economics, of all things. But destiny wasn't in numbers. It was in expression. George stumbled upon Second City, Chicago's legendary improvisational theater. What started as curiosity became passion. He swept floors there at first, literally. But in between cleaning, he studied performances, mimicked delivery styles, and watched comedians work the room. That broomstick would later become a microphone. That stage floor, a career foundation. He began to perform, and people noticed something. George didn't try to be funny. He was funny. But more than that, he was human. There was nothing slick or polished about his humor. It was raw, awkward, lovable. He wasn't the leading man type. He wasn't the rebel or the heartthrob. He was the guy sitting next to you cracking jokes that were too true to ignore. And that's why when Cheers came calling, it wasn't an audition. It was fate. It started with just a few lines. A throwaway character for a new sitcom about a Boston bar. But something happened when George Wendt said those lines. The crew laughed. The writers leaned in, and the producers realized this wasn't a side role. This was magic. Norm Peterson wasn't planned. He emerged. In the pilot episode of Cheers, George walked through the door and the bartender asked, "What'll it be, Norm?" His reply, "What do you got?" The crowd roared. And with that, a legend was born. Week after week, Norm became the voice of the viewer. Sarcastic, tired, full of dry wisdom and quiet pain. Always with a drink. Always with a joke. But behind the humor was something deeper. Norm represented the average person. The one trying to get by, find meaning, and keep smiling through it all. George made that real. He didn't overplay it. He didn't turn Norm into a caricature. He gave him soul. Subtle gestures, eye rolls, deadpan delivery, those were George's tools, and they were masterful. Norm. That shout became one of the most iconic running gags in sitcom history. Every time he entered, the bar lit up. Every time he spoke, the audience leaned in. T was familiarity in its purest form. Norm was always there. And that consistency gave people something rare in entertainment: comfort. Behind the scenes, George kept that same demeanor. Humble, funny, collaborative. He wasn't difficult, he wasn't loud, he was George. And that made all the difference. Didn't play Norm, he was Norm. And in doing so, he gave us someone we'll never stop quoting, remembering, or missing. Cheers wasn't just a show. It was a phenomenon. Running from 1982 to 1993, it redefined sitcoms. But while others chased laughs, Cheers created bonds. And at the heart of that bond sat Norm, everyman, barstool philosopher, comic relief, and emotional anchor. George's role wasn't just funny, it was foundational. While others in the cast played out romantic arcs or dramatic turns, Norm was the baseline. He gave rhythm to the room. His presence grounded the chaos. His lines, carefully timed, never overdone, were the heartbeat of the bar. The chemistry between the cast was undeniable. Ted Danson, Rhea Perlman, John Ratzenberger, they were brilliant. But George brought a stillness, a calm. The kind of quiet confidence that holds everything else up. Fans saw him as a friend. Writers saw him as essential. Co-stars saw him as irreplaceable. And when the show ended, the world didn't move on from Norm. Because how do you move on from someone who always felt like home? Cheers lives on today, on streaming platforms, on late-night reruns, in pop culture references. And every time Norm walks through that door, a part of us smiles again. Because that voice, that face, that laugh, it's more than nostalgia. It's healing. When the Cheers bar closed its doors in 1993, fans around the world were heartbroken. It was the end of an era. But for George Wendt, it was just the next chapter. He could have faded quietly. He could have retired comfortably. But George wasn't done. He continued working, not to chase fame, but because performing was in his blood. From guest appearances to recurring roles, George brought his warmth and humor to dozens of shows. He popped up in Frasier, Becker, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Clipped, and even animated favorites like Family Guy and The Simpsons. He even starred in his own short-lived sitcom, The George Wendt Show. And let's not forget the movies, Fletch, House, Forever Young, Man of the House, and countless others. While none ever eclipsed Cheers, his presence always stood out. He had a way of making any project feel a little more human. But George never acted out of ego. He acted for the joy of connection. In interviews, he rarely talked about money, ratings, or celebrity drama. He talked about the craft, the people, the moments that made the work meaningful. He also returned to his roots, live theater. On stage, in front of live audiences, George found the same energy that had launched his career. Whether it was Broadway or community theaters, he embraced it all with equal passion. No matter the role, one thing remained constant. George Wendt showed up with humility, with humor, with heart. Behind every great performer is a private world most people never see. For George Wendt, that world was full of love. He married actress Bernadette Burkett in 1978, and they remained together for over 4 decades. A rare thing in Hollywood, their bond was not a performance, it was genuine, solid, quiet, and enduring. Bernadette actually played the voice of Norm's never-seen wife, Vera, on Cheers. The irony was beautiful. The woman behind the voice was also the woman behind the man. Together, they raised 3 children away from the flashing lights. George wasn't a tabloid figure. He wasn't seen at wild parties or making controversial headlines. His biggest scandal? Being too normal. He loved his family. He loved his Chicago roots. He loved being dad and husband more than being Norm. He enjoyed jazz, barbecue, good beer. He read books, went to baseball games, and mentored younger actors quietly, without ever asking for praise. He wasn't just playing a down-to-earth guy. He was that guy. To those who knew him personally, George wasn't a celebrity. He was a gentle giant, a kind listener, a man of few words, but every word mattered. In an industry built on noise, George Wendt was a whisper that carried power. When news broke that George Wendt had passed at 76, the world reacted in a way few could have predicted. Social media timelines flooded with quotes from Cheers. Clips of Norm's best one-liners were everywhere. The comment sections weren't just filled with sad emojis, they were full of stories. People shared how George's humor helped them through hard times, how Norm made them feel seen when they felt invisible, how laughter during an episode of Cheers helped them escape from grief, heartbreak, or depression. It wasn't just fans. Celebrities chimed in. Former co-stars posted emotional tributes. Ted Danson called him the heart of the bar. Rhea Perlman said, "There would be no Cheers without George." Comedians young and old named him as a quiet influence, a master of timing, subtlety, and presence. Journalists described it best, a cultural icon without ever trying to be one. But it was the fans who captured the truth best. Norm wasn't just on the bar stool. He was in our homes, in our lives, and now he's in our hearts. The impact was undeniable. George Wendt hadn't just played a character. He had helped define a generation's idea of comfort. And now he was gone. In a world obsessed with fame, awards, and viral moments, George Wendt offered something far more powerful: consistency, kindness, and connection. He wasn't a Hollywood icon in the traditional sense. He didn't win dozens of awards. He didn't headline blockbuster movies. But what he did do mattered far more. He gave people permission to be themselves, to laugh at life's absurdities, to feel seen, even if only for 22 minutes at a time. Norm wasn't flashy. He was loyal, reliable, real, and so was George. His legacy isn't built on headlines. It's built on human emotion, on the kind of laughter that comes from truth, on the comfort that comes from familiarity. Future generations may not grow up watching Cheers live, but they'll discover it. And when they do, they'll meet Norm. And through him, they'll meet George Wendt. And once they do, they'll understand why the world felt a little heavier when he left it. When someone like George Wendt dies, it feels like a piece of something. Familiar disappears with them. For millions, he wasn't just an actor on a show. He was part of the rhythm of daily life. Norm wasn't a character people watched. He was someone they knew. He was there during lonely dinners, background noise, in hospital rooms, or late nights when someone just needed a reason to smile. His simple entrances, Norm, were more than a punchline. They were a reminder that showing up mattered, that being present even quietly made a difference. So what exactly did we lose? We lost warmth. We lost a steady, quiet voice in a world often filled with shouting. We lost someone who didn't pretend to be larger than life, but still managed to live greatly. But we also gained something, and that's what matters. We gained a legacy of gentleness in performance, a masterclass in presence without needing to dominate a scene. We gained decades of work that will live on, in reruns, in archives, in hearts, and we gained a reminder. Sometimes the loudest impact comes from the softest soul. No bar, no lights, no applause. George Wendt passed away quietly, as if slipping out the back door of the pub he once made famous. There was no big spectacle, just a simple announcement. Age 76, a life well lived, a man well loved, and somehow that feels exactly right. George never chased attention. He never needed it. His work spoke louder than headlines ever could. In a time when celebrity often means noise, scandal, or performance, George represented something more rare: substance. He reminded us that being beloved is far better than being famous. And that's why his loss hit so hard. He was the guy who didn't ask for your admiration, but earned it anyway. And when the final curtain fell, he exited the same way he entered, with dignity, with honesty, with quiet grace. Norm Peterson wasn't written to be a television legend. He was originally a background character, a side presence, a man with a few lines and a beer. But George Wendt transformed him. He gave Norm layers. He made him funny, yes, but also vulnerable, wise, but never arrogant, lonely, but never bitter. With every line, every glance, every tired sigh, George created something timeless. People still quote Norm's jokes. They still laugh at his timing. They still say, Norm, when they walk into a bar. But it's more than nostalgia. It's reverence. It's affection. It's a quiet way of saying thank you. Thank you for being there, for showing up, for making life a little lighter. And because of that, Norm and George became immortal. As long as people seek comfort, they'll find him. Sitting on that bar stool, raising a glass, reminding us that ordinary people can leave extraordinary marks. So now we raise a final glass, not just to the character, but to the man who made him real, to George Wendt, to the actor who didn't act like a star, but shined brighter than most, to the man who laughed with us, not at us, to the presence that made silence meaningful and made simple lines unforgettable. He taught us that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to steal the spotlight to leave a legacy. And most of all, you don't have to say much to be remembered forever. Just be real. Just be kind. Just be you. That was George Wendt. And now, even in silence, we still hear his laugh. We still feel his warmth. And when we hear someone say, Norm, we'll smile. Because we'll know, we'll remember, and we'll carry a piece of George with us. Always. George Wendt wasn't just Norm. And Norm wasn't just a role. Together they formed something rare, an honest reflection of the human spirit. A reminder that even in life's messiness, humor can heal, and presence can uplift. Now, as the world says goodbye, we don't just mourn the man. We celebrate the magic he left behind. He may be gone, but the chair is still warm. The laugh still echoes, and the love never left. Good night, George. You were never just sitting at the bar. You were the heart of it.